Hey Playas, how you doing? Welcome back to Playas Guide. This episode of Playas Guide is going to be like a mini documentary on American Video Entertainment. Now, this is an unlicensed company that produced video games for the original NES. So the original NES is very near and dear to me, and I really am interested in a lot of these unlicensed games. So I'm going to take a deep dive now, and I think you're going to see a little bit more of this from the channel in the future. I did a video before, and I'll have it linked at the end of this on Camerica games, and I talked about some of the better Camerica games and a little bit of the history of Camerica, so be sure to check that out. But I think moving forward, I'm going to talk a lot more about some of the developers and different games that they offered and do a little bit more extensive coverage. So in this video, you're going to get to see all of the American Video Entertainment games on the NES. So American Video Entertainment released 17 games on the NES, and I'm going to cover each of those games in just a little bit. But first, I'm going to give you a rundown and a brief history of American Video. They actually, you could say 18 or more, arguably, because of the Maxi 15 cartridge, which contained 15 of those games. But I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that, because Maxi 15 was actually going to have 30 games on it originally. So American Video Entertainment was actually a subsidiary of a company called Macronix, which was a semiconductor company. They manufactured some chips that they wanted to use for Nintendo games. However, Nintendo did not approve of these chips, and they couldn't find any purchaser for them. So they went ahead and started up a company called American Video Entertainment and decided to make their own games. So Fred Hoot is one of the three founding fathers of American Video Entertainment, and he is the one who came from Macronix. Anyways, he teamed up with Phil Mickelson, who worked with Color Dreams, Bunch Games, Wisdom Tree, on a bunch of their games, and Richard Frick, who had worked at Atari and then Tengen and Share Data, which then I believe turned into or made games for American Game Carts. Now you might know American Game Carts as AGCI. They came out with Chiller, Shockwave, Death Race, and Wally Bear and the No Gang. So you may not know about this, but there is actually a Wally Bear and the No Gang AGCI cart. Here's a picture of it here, and this cartridge is very rare. So this is one of the reasons that this game was probably purchased by either AGCI or AVE and released as an AVE game. Now, I'm not quite sure which one came first, because things get kind of weird here with American Video Entertainment and some of the Bunch games and even Saturn releases. So the first game released by American Video Entertainment was Impossible Mission 2. However, what happened with this game was it was originally released by SEI on this cartridge. You may have seen it before, by Epix. There's also a white label version. Mine has some writing on it, unfortunately. These are a little bit more rare and harder to come by. I think this game was on the Commodore before that, and it went over fairly well as a computer game and not so well as an NES game. Because it had a decent reputation behind it and there was some licensing issues with SEI and Epix, American Video Entertainment was able to pick the game up and put it onto a Nintendo cartridge. So that's the reason there are 3 versions of this game. There's possible that there's others out there that are extremely rare that I don't know about or have in my collection. But those are the three main versions of that game. So that was the first game released by American Video Entertainment. Now, American Video Entertainment only released games from 1990 to 1992. And the reason for this was because of the Nintendo lockout chip. And I'm going to get into this in a little bit more detail because this ultimately caused the demise of the company, along with a few other things. But they had no in-house games, so they actually went to Sachin, which was an Asian company, and purchased some of their games like Pyramid, and then Odyssey, who also sold games to Bunch, Color Dreams. Some of the Sachin games too were sold to Bunch, Color Dreams. So you see a lot of crossover here, and that's why we have some of these more rare variant cartridges. And just the production of a lot of these unlicensed games is a very strange thing in general. So that's why there's the different colored chiller here. So I don't know where things crossed over with each company, but as we could see with the three founders, we had a guy who worked at Atari and Tengen, we had a guy who worked at Color Dreams, and then they're purchasing these games that Nintendo didn't want to release that were out there, and they would buy these IPs or license them for a period of time and release them on their cartridges, which is very interesting, and we got a lot of really interesting variants because of this. Although most of these games were purchased from other companies, they purchased the IPs or the license to these games for a while, and some of them were shared and released in other unlicensed forms. American Video Entertainment did have a few of their own games that were made in America. Now, they weren't made in-house, but I believe they were only released as American Video Entertainment cartridges. There's Dudes with Attitudes, which is a very similar game made by Michael Crick and his daughter. They also made Trolls on Treasure Island. Another game that isn't so bad is Crazy Creatures, and is one of the better games released by American Video Entertainment. That, I believe, was also made in the US. For the most part, most of these games were, garbage. They weren't that good. And you'll see for yourself in a minute, because like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to cover every game and just go over them a little bit and touch upon so you can see what they are all about. Now, Nintendo came out with the lockout chip to prevent companies like American Video Entertainment from releasing these games that they did not want to license and didn't deem worthy of the console. And they also didn't want, these other companies coming out with games and profiting when Nintendo had their own strict licensing policies. So American Video Entertainment actually went through with a $105 million lawsuit against Nintendo that was settled in secrecy. But I can't imagine that it went that well for American Video Entertainment. And they didn't really release any other consoles games for the NES or other consoles after. Now, this probably had to do with the poor quality of these games. I don't imagine they sold very well. Most of them are uncommon. There's a few that are harder to find. These aren't the rarest unlicensed games. You do come across them from time to time. But I don't think they would have sold that well, at least not compared to the stuff that Nintendo was actually licensing out. American Video Entertainment struggled with the lockout chip and couldn't get around it, so their solution to getting around it was to have people call a 1-800 number, 1-800-HOT for AVE. That's kind of a weird, hotline number to pick, but whatever they thought they could do to stay alive. And the caller would then be instructed on how to work their way around and modify their Nintendo Entertainment System so that it would play these games. Another thing to consider was that the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo had already entered the market, and these not so great NES games just, they couldn't hold up against these newer generation consoles and what 16-bit games had to offer. So people looking to buy these games, probably didn't have the best experience, and moving forward, sales would continue to diminish. So I think this is what all these things led to the downfall of American video entertainment. But they did try to hold on. So American Video Entertainment came out with this really awesome infomercial with Hulk Hogan for a game called Maxi Vision 30-in-1. And they made these games sound amazing. They made them look as good as they could. And you're going to see some Color Dreams games in here, like Captain Comic and Menace Beach, mixed in with AGCI games like Shockwave. And there was 30 games on this cartridge, which would have been all of the AVE games, as well as some of these other games that they had the license to for a brief period in time. Now, I'm assuming the licenses didn't work out for all these games. Some of the games may not have ever truly been released, but you got to give it to them. This infomercial looks phenomenal and is a true product of its time. The cartridge looks pretty cool too, although it looks as though there's a couple different variations of the cartridge or the prototype that they had at that time. Now notice there's very little actual gameplay of the kids playing the games, and I can only imagine that is because if they did get that footage, these kids probably would have given up and got frustrated with these games, because a lot of them are not very good or fun to play, so it's kind of hard to get excited and compete, when these games aren't really that great. That infomercial is pretty awesome and also pretty hilarious too. Now let's take a look at the American Video Entertainment games that we got here in North America, released for the Nintendo Entertainment System. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of each of the games here in alphabetical order. First up is Blackjack. This is one of the more rare games by American Video Entertainment, and it's Blackjack. It's pretty straightforward. Deathbots is a game that is not so great. It kept my interest for a little bit, but really no more than like 2 or 3 minutes, and then you already know what the game is about. It's just not very good. You could see some gameplay here, and the game is worse than it looks. It does have the coolest cover art of all of the American Video Entertainment games, in my opinion. It's an uncommon game. Double Strike, this is a horizontal shooter. It's okay. It's playable. It's not terrible. It is somewhat challenging because it's not programmed as well as the really good shooters. But I mean, really, if you're looking for a good shooter, this is not going to be the one that you're going to go to. Dudes with Attitudes, it's a pretty common game. It is one of the better games from the American Video Entertainment releases, and it is this like puzzle game where you change your dude one color and then match it to eliminate objects of that same color on the screen. It does get kind of repetitive and boring, and it does progress reasonably well, but some of the later stages I find are just too difficult. F-15 City War is like a fighter pilot flight simulator type game. I'm not really into those style of games, and this one is a low quality one at that. I think that's one of the reasons why it is so common, because most people don't want it in their collection unless they're into collecting unlicensed games. Impossible Mission 2, as mentioned before, was a computer game that was ported to the NES. This is the port that we got. It had already been released. I can't help but think that that didn't help the sales for American Video Entertainment. But you never know, because it already had established a name for itself. It might have been one of the more recognizable titles. It's a platforming type game and not a good one at that. Now, I realize there maybe are some fans of this on Commodore or Amiga or PC, wherever they played it. But for me on the NES, it's a no-go. Crazy Creatures. This game actually has a decent reputation for being a pretty good game. It is a fairly common game, so if you're looking for a copy, you shouldn't have too much trouble finding one. Probably, like I said, the best game here. It's a puzzle game where you match up different animals and creatures. Now, the infomercial made it sound really cool that like you're some galactic customs officer, and there's really not too much of that going on. They really kind of hyped it up and tried to sell you on something that was more than what it was. Mermaids of Atlantis. This is an interesting game where you're a mermaid blowing bubbles from behind you. I mean, you can only imagine where those bubbles are coming from. And it's like a Tetris-y type puzzle thing, but nowhere near as good as Tetris. It's actually quite challenging to play. This game was released as one of the Pan-Asian games, Bubble Bath Babes, which you may have heard of. The only difference is that you're topless in Bubble Bath Babes, which is why it was one of the rare X-rated games. So I am guessing that this was another game that American Video Entertainment got the license to and just put a top on the mermaid so that it wasn't a naked woman and they could sell it as one of their own games. Puzzle. This game is not that great. It's like one of those little dollar store puzzle things you'd get in a loot bag as a kid that were often frustrating. And I would just take the puzzle pieces out and then put them back in, assembled in the correct order. Now, I was able to figure them out. I did figure out one of the puzzles for this video here. But then after that, I just gave up because I didn't want to continue doing that. And you probably won't either. This is a common game. If you're going for unlicensed games, you'll want to pick it up. Otherwise, you're not going to want this game in your collection. Bad Racket 2, I would say, is the rarest American Video Entertainment System game, aside from Maxi 15. And even then, that might be arguable. It's tennis. It's not terrible. It's not great tennis on the NES. I don't know if it's just my timing or the game controls, but I did find my reaction time to hit the ball was a bit off. Again, that's probably just me. In this game isn't terrible, but it's also nothing to write home about. Solitaire. Not much needs to be said about this game. You play it alone. It's solitaire. Tiles of Fate. Now, this game really sounds better than it is. It is basically like a glorified version of Mahjong tiles, where it's supposed to have an effect every time you eliminate 2 tiles on an army. Now, visually, they could have done a lot more with that, but they didn't. This is just a cheap game that they were able to license out and put on a cartridge. Trolls on Treasure Island was probably their most successful game, I would imagine. I'm just speculating that. It was done by the same people that did Dudes with Attitudes, and when you play it, you can tell that. It's basically a sequel to that game because it plays exactly the same. You're just trolls, and they are new stages. Now, one thing that I think would have helped the sale of this game is the fact that most copies, as far as I know, were packaged with a treasure troll, and trolls in the early 90s were all the rage. So packaging it with that toy in a game, Nintendo game, no less, about trolls, I imagine would have sold fairly well. And American Video Entertainment did have a deal and fairly close relationship with Toys R Us, so having that in a Toys R Us would be something that kids would definitely want to buy. And like I said, it's not the worst game here. It's not a great game. It's not something I'm going to go recommend to you to go out and immediately buy, but it's not terrible. Ultimate League Soccer, this is one that it's fairly uncommon. You don't see this one very often. It's a soccer game, and it's actually not bad. Now, I'm not great at sports games, so what you're seeing here in terms of gameplay may not be the most accurate depiction of the gameplay, but it's not that bad, actually, for a soccer game. Venice Beach Volleyball. This is another game not too bad, you know, for a volleyball game. It's definitely nothing like Super Spike V-Ball in terms of quality, and it shows on all of these American video entertainment games, if you haven't noticed, but it doesn't stink as much as many of these games do. Wally Bear and the No Gang. So here's another one that's very uncommon, if not a little bit rare. Now, obviously, the American Video Entertainment version of this game is not the rarest. This game is about a bear and his gang of animal friends, so very animated, cartoony cast that say no to drugs. And throughout the game, there's a narrative that Wally Bear is skateboarding around in an action platforming setting, telling his friends, don't do drugs, or put the drugs away, don't hang out with those people, they're not cool, they do drugs. So it was all part of the Say No to Drugs campaign, or actually it wasn't, because they couldn't actually get the license to that, probably because the game is not that great. But that was something that, you know, Dare and all that was a popular thing back in the early 90s, really trying to drive home the message to not do drugs. And this game tried to cash in on that. Playas, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. If you really liked this episode, give it a thumbs up. Let me know, because I would like to do more of these like mini documentaries that cover games and game companies a little bit more extensively. They do take more time to produce, so I can't put them out as quickly as some other videos that you'll see on the channel. Follow Playas Guide on Twitter and Instagram. We have daily retro gaming content on Twitch and a community on Discord. All of those things are linked below, because Playas Guide wants to be your source for retro gaming and collecting. Until next week, later, Playas.